Alright, this will be a quick refresher on graphing. So notice we're going to start out with a sine graph. And amplitude and period are going to be definitely two key things that you're going to be asked to identify. And of course, any shifting, like horizontal or vertical shifts, any reflections. So we'll talk through all of that, even though I didn't list spaces for everything. So remind yourself that just the general equation for a sine graph is a times sine of bx. So noticing A, of course, is your amplitude. So my number in front of sine is 3, so that's going to be my amplitude. And B, which is the number in front of x, is 1/2. So that's, I'll just note that over here. B is 1/2. Period, of course, and you have to know this, is 2 pi divided by B. So in my case, that's 2 pi divided by 1/2, which is going to be 4 pi. So we have a very large period that one cycle will fit in. And frequency, remember, is just the reciprocal of period. So 1 over 4 pi, which just tells you that one sine wave will occur in 4 pi units of time. So I also note that I have in parentheses x plus, I'm sorry, that's supposed to be a pi, so change that if you wrote that down. I have x plus pi, so that means I'm going to actually shift. Anything in parentheses is a horizontal shift, so I'm going to shift to the left pi units. And you can certainly do that as you plot points, or you can plot the points without the shift and then shift all of them. Whatever works best, you know, for you. So I'm going to plot the points as if there's not a shift and then take them all and shift them to the left pi. So first and foremost, I would note that a sine graph starts right on the origin. And then if I could go out the length of my period, which is 4 pi, but I don't have that much space, so I'm going to go from negative 2 pi to 2 pi, and that's where my sine wave will fit, which will be fine. I'll talk through it as if I'm going through 4 pi, but please note that negative 2 pi to positive 2 pi is a period of 4 pi, right? Then my amplitude is 3, and my graph is scaled by ones here, so kind of in this, you know, rectangular region is where one sine wave would occur without the shift. So sine graphs start on the origin, and then way out at 4 pi would be another point, and then halfway in between, which is 2 pi, would also be right on. So I'll just kind of mark that. So just to pretend with me, actually maybe I'll just squeeze a point out here, even though I know it's not really 4 pi, but let's just pretend that's 4 pi. Okay, so now halfway in between 0 and 2 pi, I'm going to go up to my amplitude, and note it's not reflected. So that'd be up here, and then halfway in between 2 and 4 pi, I would go down my amplitude. So I really could squeeze that in for sure. So that would be my sine wave, but before I draw it, I'm going to now shift everything to the left pi units, and I will use a different color so that I don't confuse you or myself. So I'm going to take all of these points and shift them to the left pi, and note pi is 4 increments, right? So I'm going to shift them all to the left pi units. So that's at 3 pi. Be right there, and then the last point at 4 pi would now be at 3 pi. And there is one cycle of my sine wave. Now, of course, you should, you know, fill up your graph, and actually this is pretty filled up, but I could definitely go out another, you know, I could take it as far as I, you know, can, but that would be my sine wave. All right, this one is a cosine graph, and I guess remind yourself that a cosine graph starts at your amplitude and ends at your amplitude. Halfway in between is your lower amplitude, and then halfway, so, you know, it kind of does that. So just kind of reminding you of the cosine pattern. Notice this is a, you know, a times b to the x, so my amplitude is 4. Remember, amplitude is never negative. I realize that it's negative, so right away I'm going to make a note to myself that this graph is going to be reflected because my 4 is negative. So actually my sine graph is going to instead kind of do this. So it'll just be reflected. My period, the number in front of x is 2, so my period is 2 pi divided by b, so 2 pi divided by 2 is pi, and my frequency is the reciprocal of period, so 1 cycle for pi units of time. Then, last but not least, I have -1 that's not in parentheses, so everything is going to be shifted down 1 unit, and I will remember to end with that. So I'm going to ignore the downshift first, and then I'm going to kind of envision my cosine wave. So cosine, let's see, my period goes through pi, and my amplitude is 4, and it's reflected. Okay, so I'm going to kind of talk through all of that. So typically cosine would start up at my amplitude of 4, but now it's going to start down at my amplitude of 4, and it's going to end at pi units, which is my period. Okay, so from 0 through pi, that's my period, right? So it's going to start and end there, but it's down my amplitude since it's reflected. And then my highest point, my peak of my cosine wave, will be halfway between, which is 1/2 pi, and that's up at 4. And then my halfway points between those will be right on, and that would be my cosine wave. But before I draw that, everything is shifted down 1 unit, and unfortunately I'm going to have to go off my graph, but that's all right. And again, I'll use a different graph so I don't confuse myself. So all of those points shift down 1 unit, so that's down, down, down. I'll estimate this is down 1 unit, and you get the idea. And then of course I should, well, let me connect this first. I should graph another cycle because that's not really filling up my space. So another pi units would take me to 2 pi, so that would be there, and halfway in between would be there. So I can kind of just continue that cycle, and you get the idea. All right, last graph. No shifts, no parentheses, nothing after the cosine, so that's kind of a treat. Remind yourself that cosine starts at your amplitude and ends at your amplitude. Halfway between is your lower, going down your amplitude, and then your halfway points between there are right on, and your cosine graph will look something like that. So my amplitude is the number in front of cosine, and that's 2, and it's positive always, and I'm not reflected because my cosine is positive. My period is 2 pi divided by b, and b is 4. So that's going to be pi over 2, and frequency is the reciprocal of that. So the reciprocal of pi over 2 is 2 over pi, which means I'm going to have 2 cycles occurring in pi units of time. Alright, so a smaller period here, which is fine. So cosine wave starts right on my amplitude, and my amplitude is 2, so it's going to start on there, and my period is only 1/2 of a pi, so it's actually going to end there, so it's going to be a real tight cosine wave, and halfway in between there, at 1/4 of a pi, will be my lower amplitude, so -2, and then halfway in between that, which is 1/8 of a pi, and I don't have it incremented, but we can estimate that, of course, will be my points where I'm right on the x-axis, right on the midline. So there is my 1 cosine cycle, and I'm just going to draw another one. So the other one would end, I'm just going to draw some more points in here so I don't get off here. So here's another cycle. And as many of those, as you can, I think I just got off there. Sorry, it's a little wavy, but you get the idea. And there is my function, my cosine graph.